Great. So I think we're ready to move forward. Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic. All right. Well, hello and welcome to tonight's webinar, everyone. My name is Chet Bradley, and I'm one of the curriculum designers here at EGAL. I'll be your moderator for tonight's session. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple quick housekeeping details. First, be aware that this session is being recorded and that we will be sharing a link to the recording with everyone after the session for your ongoing reference. Throughout tonight's session, there will be multiple opportunities for you to interact with us and with each other. Most of you will see your interaction buttons along the bottom of your webinar window. There are three: Q&A, chat, and hand raise. If you don't see these buttons, your browser or your app may just be set to automatically minimize them. You would be able to open them up just by scrolling your mouse or your finger to the bottom of your screen, and they should pop up for you. Since the chat could get busy, I would ask that everyone please reserve the Q&A button for technical assistance questions and for submitting any formal questions you have for the presenter. And we will have a formal Q&A segment at the end of the session to answer any submitted questions. So please feel free to drop in any questions you think of as we go along. For all of the discussion, please use the chat function. Also, please note that all participant microphones and cameras have been initially disabled, but if you would like to respond or contribute verbally and or through video, please click the hand raise feature and we'll enable your mic and or your camera. In the interest of time though, this will be used at the facilitator's discretion. Now that we're familiar with our room, I think it's time to get started. I'd like to pass the mic over to our presenter tonight, Katie.
Hello folks, thank you so much for making the time to be here with us. It's quite cold here in Windsor, Ontario, so hopefully you are curled up and comfortable. These sessions, at least in the last one that we did, seem to go really quickly, so I'm going to try my best to keep us on time. We do start all of our workshops with a discussion around land acknowledgement, and that means that we're acknowledging that the work that we are doing is being done on sacred, stolen, and traditional land. So I'm not going to do a tradition. Some land acknowledgements look a little bit different. You may have from your schools or your organizations one that you prefer to use, but we do like to have a discussion about these are really important pieces of the work because they are so intricately linked to the work that we're talking about tonight around homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and all of the kind of gender and sexuality oppressions that we're going to be discussing. So I would encourage you in your groups, in your classrooms, or in your GSAs to find some kind of land acknowledgement that feels comfortable for you, and to just acknowledge the connections between the work that your GSAs or groups is probably doing and colonialism. So if you don't know much about EGAL, some of you have probably been to a workshop or two of ours before, or maybe not. EGAL is Canada's national leading organization for LGBTQ2IS advocacy. So in some ways that has looked like lobbying for legal same-sex marriage. For some that has been education, that has been social media campaigns. There's been a lot of ways that we have been involved. We are often doing webinars or workshops like this in schools, but we have been around for quite some time. Myself, I have been working with EGAL for about 6 or 7 years now, so quite some time. And if you're curious about us, I'm sure that one of my moderators could drop our website into the chat so you can check us out if you are kind of new to the organization. So my name is Katie Casey. My pronouns are she and her. And just a little bit about myself. I always think that folks would like to know kind of who is this person that is chatting at you for the next hour. My background is actually violence against women and sexual violence work, so trauma-informed care. For about a decade, I did frontline work as well as research and education work in those areas, primarily working for sexual assault centers. As you can imagine, there was lots of intersectionality there between trans identities or queer identities and the kind of sexual violence that they were experiencing in different forms. So when I moved here to Windsor about 6 years ago, I went to an EGAL workshop and they asked me to apply for a job as a facilitator, and I said, that sounds like a great idea. So I've been working for EGAL since I think 2013 or 2014. I'm currently also full-time employed at the University of Windsor. I teach a positive psychology and resiliency program for students who are struggling for a variety of reasons. And I'm a sessional instructor at St. Clair College, and I teach a course there called #MeToo, which is all about social movement. So if you have any questions about myself as a facilitator, I'm happy to answer them at the end, but just so you have a little bit of information about who is talking with you tonight. So we're just going to do a brief look at the agenda here for this evening. The time goes by really quickly, so we are going to be talking first about the who, the why, and the what. So affirming adults as being vital as ever. And what we mean by this is who can be an affirming adult, what does that look like, and why is that important? We're next going to shift into the whole school, sections 2 and 3 are going to be more like the how. So we're going to be talking about your whole school and community and the promising practices that we recommend or have seen that are going well. And we're also going to be talking about preventing and mitigating harm to the best of our abilities within those communities, and how have we seen that working well. And then finally, we're going to be, sharing is caring here at EGAL. So we're going to be making sure that we have time for some knowledge exchange, some Q&A, and a little bit of maybe connection between those of you who are doing similar work, but in different places, and feel like it would be beneficial for you to be able to connect. So that's kind of going to be the flow for our evening. And I think that if there's anything urgent, I'm not currently monitoring the chat because that would be really distracting for me as I'm trying to run the workshop, which is why Chet is here and is super good at that. So if there's anything really urgent that comes up as questions that we feel like we need to stop and answer right then and there, Chet will let me know, and I'll be able to answer them. Otherwise, we'll save them towards the end of the workshop so that we actually get the whole thing in. So we are going to do a bit of an icebreaker to start. And this is for those of you who are looking for ways to engage folks in an online, perhaps in your GSAs or in other online avenues if you're using Zoom. We have discovered that polls is a really interesting way to do that. So Chet's going to run them for me. I'm going to ask you some questions, and we're going to ask you just to respond and rate your confidence or preparedness in the following ways. So 1, meaning you are definitely not confident or prepared for this. 2, meaning I'm not sure how confident or prepared I feel. 3, I feel reasonably confident and prepared. And 4, I feel very confident and well prepared for this. So the first question is, could you rate your confidence or preparedness in challenging a school administrator who has denied a request to resourcing for either restarting up or starting up your GSA based on the premise that it just isn't a priority with everything else that's going on right now? So what's your comfortability with challenging your administrators if they were to say deny a request for resources? Is that working as planned on your end, Chet? Great. Okay. So most of you are feeling reasonably confident or prepared, which I think is great. There's a few of us who are not quite sure, and a few of us that feel really confident and well prepared. So I'm glad to hear that as well. Our next question is if you can rate your preparedness or confidence around politely correcting your principal when you hear them repeatedly misgender or misname someone in your school community. So what's your comfortability in correcting your principal if they are kind of misgendering or misnaming somebody in your school community? I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that. Oh, great. There's almost like 3/4 of you are feeling very confident and well prepared to do this. So we have some confident folks in the room tonight. That's great. Our next one is if you could do the same for your comfortability supporting a student who has come to you after being a target of online harassment you suspect is transphobic in nature, knowing that they are not out to their parents. So what's your comfortability in supporting that student? Okay, I'm not so the most common answer was you're not sure how confident or prepared you feel. And then we also have some folks that are feeling reasonably confident or very confident. Our next question, same format, is your comfortability responding to feedback from a parent who has pointed out that one of your classroom activities reinforces harmful gender stereotypes in a way that demonstrates humility and accountability. What's your comfortability in responding to that kind of feedback? Give folks a few minutes to answer. Okay, good. So over half of you are feeling reasonably confident and prepared. I think this is perhaps in doing this work, it's definitely a complicated bit, being able to gracefully take that feedback when we feel like we're trying to do the best in the work. So I'm glad to see that 55% of you are feeling at least reasonably comfortable. And our last one here is your comfortability seizing an opportunity to teach about intersectionality when you notice a pattern of faith bashing rhetoric in your class, GSA, staff meeting, or home that frames some communities as more queerphobic than others. So seizing an opportunity to teach about intersectionality when you notice a pattern of faith bashing rhetoric in your class, GSA, staff meeting, or home that frames some communities as more queerphobic than others. Okay. Yeah, so this is actually kind of expected, I think. This one is challenging. I'm not sure how confident or prepared I feel. About a third of you feel reasonably confident, and then just a little less than a third of you feel very confident and well prepared for this. So hopefully we'll be giving you some tools tonight to feel a little bit more comfortable in doing and kind of taking that opportunity to teach about intersectionality. Okay, thanks so much, folks. We're going to keep moving. Advance here. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is, I think it's really important for us to have some context around the pandemic that we are still in and its impacts on queer youth. So when we're thinking about being affirming adults, the atmosphere for that has changed a little bit than it was, say, 2 years ago. And it's really important to acknowledge that when we're thinking about the ways that we can show up for the queer folks in our lives. So some of the impacts from the pandemic have been more exposure to non-affirming environments and relationships. So that might mean that they are stuck at home with families that are not affirming, or an environment. I know I personally have some students at the university, international students in particular, that have really found safety in their attendance at a school in Ontario, that with the pandemic and being unable to attend school and access those safer spaces, some of them are in international countries where it's actually illegal to be queer. So we're definitely seeing that happen at our university. And I think actually one of my moderators has a resource that they're going to drop into the chat about what to do if you are stuck at home with your homophobic, transphobic, etc. Family or community during the pandemic. So it's just important to note that, as well as shrinking access to safer and affirming ones. So much like I mentioned with the university, sometimes our folks are really relying on schools or community-based organizations to be safe for them, and they're having less access to those spaces. We also want to think about the impacts of the current political climate. So I don't know for the rest of you, it sounds like we have lots of people across Canada here. Here in Windsor, because we're so close to the States, the American election has had an enormous impact on the queer folks in my life. I think that there are some really clearly homophobic statements and policies by the Trump administration that have been really backed by that administration. So it can be quite activating for many of us to see the people that we love online showing support for that administration. I know in my community we have, because we're so close to the States, people actually have Trump signs on their lawns. I'm like, you don't get to vote, but they do that anyways. I know too that I have had some really close friends in the States. There's some concern about the Marriage Equality Act being overturned. And so folks who have families in the States, because of the Marriage Equality Act, they both have rights to their children. If there's a non-biological or non-birth parent, if the Marriage Equality Act is overturned, they no longer have those kind of given right. So there's been this mass kind of rush towards second parent adoption. Family lawyers are really being overwhelmed by that right now. So just thinking about also that, things like the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a bunch of kind of intersectional pieces that are happening politically in our world right now. And when most of our interactions are happening online, that's also affecting our queer youth during this pandemic. Also, there may be added stressors that are especially unbearable to those who are already struggling. So I know many of my kids are really struggling with having to be home a lot, the isolation, the lack of community. When we see a youth that is already struggling, and then we add, the challenge of learning online from home, or perhaps accessibility to food, connectivity, or resources, we see them need that affirming presence in their life even more so, because they're being kind of lays for them are much heavier. And also LGBTQI2S support initiatives may have become deprioritized by gatekeepers. So with administrators being so focused on, is everybody wearing their mask, the flow of things in schools, are we going to be shut down? That was a recent discussion here in Ontario until today. That may have been pushed to the wayside, and that can be challenging for those of us who are trying to be affirming folks for the queer people in our lives. So just as we're moving into this discussion, remembering that the pandemic does shift things for us a little bit, this conversation 2 years ago would have been a little bit different. Okay, now if you're here, I'm assuming that I'm preaching to the choir, but it's really important for you to know, if you need to share this information with other folks, that LGBTQ I2S youth with supportive adults both inside and outside their family are 4 times more likely to report good or excellent mental health. So if we think about the hierarchy of needs, we need to be feeling safe as like a very base need that is met before we can start kind of climbing that pyramid of self-actualization. And the research shows us that if a queer youth can identify even just one affirming adult within their school space, we start to see really incredible and significant impacts on their academic performance, their sense of belonging, their mental health. Like there's across the board, we start to see really big differences. So if you are out there and doing your best to be an affirming adult, even if you're not seeing it, your impacts are enormous. So it's just really, this is really important, because you might be the only affirming adult that person has if they don't have home. So thanks so much for being here. And I won't beleaguer this, because I think if you're here, you're probably already on board with this idea. Okay, so what does it mean to be affirming? And this can mean a variety of different things. Maybe you're all practicing in different ways, but what we kind of want to start focusing in on is the thought of fostering optimal conditions for self-development. So whether that's your classroom, your school, or your community, is your environment creating purposeful space for folks to optimally self-identify, self-develop, self-explore? Are you giving them options? Are we using affirming language? Are we normalizing the things that we are hoping to affirm? All those sorts of things that we're going to talk a little bit more about in the workshop. We also want to reinforce rights and denormalize violence and harm. And one of the ways that we really like to do this, these webinars, usually I was just talking with both Chet and Jacqueline, who are here to help tonight, about how normally these workshops are about 3+ hours long. So one of the things that I really like to do as a beginning way to work together is to have kind of a collective agreement of how we want to be treated. So even if you have this great group of kids, or you're not sure about what classroom you're walking into, kind of setting that bar right away is a great way to kind of set the tone for your community or your classroom. So, you know, this is what we would like, this is what we are not going to accept, etc. We also want to keep communication channels open and listen actively. So this means creating opportunities for communication to happen, setting up perhaps ways for your youth to check in with you. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. If I don't know, some folks have, I know the program that I run, I don't like to allow myself to be completely accessible via my personal email all the time, but I do have a more generic email that I say I will check between X and Y. So if folks are feeling comfortable with checking in that email, they know there's parameters for when I will be checking that, and they can access me, tell me things, let me know worries, concerns, things like that, that way. And it's also really important, I'm not going to run my 3-hour lecture on active listening tonight, but as somebody who is a quick talker, and my wife always says that she could take me to a party and I could like talk to a wall. I think that I always try to remember active listening skills when I am communicating, especially with people who are feeling nervous or who are feeling vulnerable. So making sure that I'm asking questions, that I'm allowing quiet down times for folks who don't think and talk like I do, who are needing a few more minutes to collect their thoughts. There's a whole bunch of adjacent skills to actively listening, but making sure that we're creating the space for the folks in our lives who may want to be telling us things. It also means receiving feedback with humility and accountability, and this can be really hard, especially when we are really trying our best and that is not our intention. We have a whole piece in other workshops for EGAL that talk about intent versus effect. So we always say, you know, if I step on your toe and I say, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to step on your toe, it doesn't mean your toe doesn't hurt. So we want to be thinking about how do we receive feedback with humility and accountability. So I think we might actually, what I would love to do, because that question, Chet, if that's okay, that question was really quite spread apart when we did the poll. And I would love to hear them exchange some thoughts about that towards the end, if that would be okay.
Yeah, for sure.
And then finally, we want to commit to continuous learning as an affirming identity. So I think, I know that I have been working, like I said, for EGAL for I think 6 or 7 years now. My knowledge and language and actions between then and now are incredibly different. There's still been really big learning that's been happening for me, and that's going to continue to happen. What I have really appreciated about my team, and I hope you all have a team out there, or at least one other teammate in your corner, is that I feel like that for me anyways has been challenged really gracefully. And I feel like when I need to, if we go back to that piece of handling accountability with humility, that's always happened. I've been lucky in that way. And make sure that you're always looking for new resources. So not only when you mess up, but are there new guidelines? Are there new resources? Are there updated versions? I know an example for us here at EGAL is Gendy looks a whole lot different than Gendy did 6 years ago. So making sure that you're using the most up-to-date information in your spaces. Okay. So primarily, I think we looked at the makeup of the class tonight or the session tonight. And I think primarily you folks are coming from learning institutions, schools, I think. But we also wanted to have a little bit of a chat about affirming practices in the classroom and beyond. Also largely because of we had talked about the pandemic has really changed so many things for us in education. So like I mentioned, I also work in education. I work full-time at the University of Windsor, and my class, oh boy, my class and my work does not look the same as it did a year ago. And I don't know where all of you are at, but it has really, there's been some warning for me about what that looks like, and some really big learning about how that has created some other possibilities. So first we would say we would invite you to think about finding creative and emerging possibilities and connections for learning. So there are new ways that we are connecting because of the pandemic that we wouldn't have normally thought of before. I know that my classroom, I used to teach 5 classes at the same time in person, and we had to switch to online because of the pandemic this year, which was challenging in some ways. But also I discovered that there was a whole population of folks, primarily like commuter students and parents of small children, who couldn't take my classes in the way that they were being offered before. So there has been some learning in accessibility. Maybe some of your folks are commuting back and forth from schools, or they don't feel comfortable being present in your clubs or classrooms or out in those more public school spaces, but the pandemic has actually allowed for kind of new possibilities. So we want to be thinking about that. I believe that Jacqueline is going to put our needs assessment as well into the chat, but we would encourage you to listen for, ask about, and respond to emerging needs. So this was a big thing that I learned in my frontline work. Was sometimes we would have a client come in and I'd be getting ready to do all of their intake stuff and show them where their bed was going to be, and that was kind of my singular focus, and they were really worried about getting their animals out of the home, you know. So sometimes we have this idea of what the needs are of our population, students or clients, and it's actually very different. So before we begin to do the work, it's really helpful for us to be thinking about what are their actual needs. And we're going to talk and share a resource with you around specifically online, moving GSAs specifically online later on, and we'll make that available to you. This one is pretty straightforward, but we also want to make sure that you are that you have culturally competent and well-equipped support and guidance staff in the work that you are doing. So I have seen far too many times in the many different kind of institutions I've worked in where we see a youth kind of gear up to disclose or to tell us something, and the last thing we want is for that individual to have made the brave move to tell us something really important and us not to have competent folks or trained folks in place. So when you're thinking about affirming practices, you know, we talk a lot about the rainbow sticker on the door. Like if you're going to put that rainbow sticker on the door, that person needs to have had the training to be able to respond. And I'm going to talk about this in the next slide, but we are also wanting to think about building active and adaptive GSAs. So we have this was the last time that my coworkers and I worked together last month. We did a whole webinar on how we are active and adaptive with GSAs in our current climate with some creative ideas. Also, I think it's just really important for you to know, just like being an affirming adult, that GSAs online in this climate may be arguably more important than kind of pre-pandemic. They may be the only place that folks are finding their identities affirmed and getting the support that they need. So if you are struggling to keep those going, knowing that that is really important work that you're doing. And then also continuing to influence your school and community culture digitally. So we have heard some really, and again, actually, Chet, I wouldn't mind if I think we're moving along on time here, okay, miraculously this evening. Does that sound right?
We're a little bit behind, but I think you can catch up.
Okay, I was being delusional. I thought maybe that I felt like I was moving things along. I would love to hear, we had in our last webinar some really creative ways that folks were doing, they were influencing their communities digitally right now. So just some really creative campaigns. So I'm sure you folks have ideas as well. And then form affirming adult networks and make yourselves known in your spaces. So whether you want to come up with a signal for like, you know, the universal kind of like the rainbow pin is what we have used, or lanyards, or I know that this year my daughter went to school and we were really nervous to send her, and our school was one of the only rural schools that flew the rainbow flag. So before we even sent her there, we were feeling encouraged that the school was thinking about that. So creating those networks, making sure that you're supporting each other and the work that you're doing, and also making yourselves known so folks know where to go if they are looking for somebody who's affirming. So this is just a learning resource that I'm not going to beleaguer because we're going to be talking about this again at a later date, but I think that Jacqueline is going to drop some stuff in the chat about this around draw the line against transphobic violence. So this is a whole kind of campaign. It's a guide for educators working with youth to support bystander intervention in transphobic and sexual violence. So this is one of the ways that we just wanted to highlight that you could perhaps adopt this campaign in your own schools if you were looking for ways to culturally influence, like we just talked about, or make yourselves visible. That will be going in the chat. I also just want to note that at the end of the webinar, we're going to have an actually condensed resource for you, but you're just going to be getting these kind of piecemeal as we go so that you can take a look at them as I'm talking about them. But Chet, and I try my best to stay on time as Chet is nodding at me, so we're not going to go over them in complete detail. Another one here, if you're looking for kind of activities to do with your groups in your communities, your GSAs, things like that, is EGAL actually came out with this documentary. It's called Sex, Sin, and 69. So 50 years later, Sex, Sin, and 69. It's a documentary. They can drop the trailer, so we don't have to watch this. And but it's a great discussion about the decriminalization of homosexuality over time. It has a kind of learning resources, some questions, some guides, that if you're looking for something that's kind of like ready to go in your own, to run in your own communities, this is a great one. You can get in touch with us to ask about access to this documentary. Okay, so at this point, we are going to ask you to share some ideas. At the end, we can do those more specific ones if you want, Chet, if we have time. But what have the ingredients of an affirming school environment been for you? So we'd love for you to share in the chat. What have been some things, some affirming practices, behaviors, ideas? What has been going on for you in your schools? I was sharing with both Chet and Jacqueline when we were talking about this webinar that my daughter is 4. Her name is Indigo, and she went to school this year, and we were just really quite petrified about sending her. But when we got there, the school we're the only 2-mom crew in the whole school. It's a small rural school. And it was like we were prepared to have to kind of have that conversation and do some education, and they were just nonplussed. All of the forms were streamlined. Nobody asked any questions. Everything comes back home addressed to either mommy or mama. They learned really quickly how she addresses us, and it's been a really affirming experience for us as a family. So do we have any there, Chet, that you would like to share or highlight?
Yeah, and I also want to highlight, just to remind everybody that you can send comments both privately and publicly to either just the panelists or to the public, or to the rest of the attendees. So just remember to toggle there's a little drop-down menu in the to field, beside the to field, to share what you're doing with everybody here so we can all learn together. So one thing that Jordan mentioned was using the term QSA as opposed to GSA, LGBTQIA morning announcements, Trans Awareness Month display, which included research completed and posted by students with pictures of trans and non-binary role models. That's a lot of really great ideas. The chat is scrolling quickly.
Oh, good.
Purchase the additional text for classroom use on diversity topics. That's great. I can't see who this was from, but having an LGBTQ2S+ affirming books in the library, so very similar to what Jordan was saying. Many libraries in classroom, and ensuring that sexual health education resources are inclusive. Big
Great.
nod.
Yeah.
Somebody, again, Jan, said they had a student tell them today that they felt comfortable going to their school just because it advertises having a GSA.
Oh, wow.
ensuring that math problems include different types of relationships. That's a fantastic idea. I love that. Creating PD to build capacity with teachers. Yes, ongoing. Creating an on creating inclusive and safe classrooms. Lots of really great ideas.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'll just try to go really quickly. Well, actually, no, I think we do have a moment.
We do, actually. It's a miracle.
Yeah, you caught yourself up.
I did.
So somebody else said that their GSA fundraise bought paint and have a 16-foot by 8-foot, oh my goodness, pride flag on the outside wall of their school, and that they painted it together over the summer. What a wonderful
Oh,
idea.
so nice.
Yeah. And I think it's Sarah said that they've had some really controversial events happen at the school board. Yeah, Sarah, in Regina. So making sure that the teachers and students know that Sarah is in an affirming adult there to listen, and or support, I think will be important. Also, they're a new trustee, so that's an additional role and additional important visibility for allyship. Let's see. Somebody else mentioned rainbow flags, trans flags at the main entrance of the school and in the cafeteria, posters around the school, having a Pride Club once a week virtually, and Pride Day events. Lots of really fantastic ideas.
So good.
Yeah.
I have to say too, like these, as a parent, we were just having this discussion that these kinds of things, they just make such a huge difference. They just like recognizing those activities that are happening, even if you're just passing by and nobody has said anything to you, knowing that, like, I can tell you as a parent of a new little person in school, these just really make a huge difference.
Very much. Karen actually has some fantastic comments touching on what you were talking about earlier about self-care, having GSE meets talking about what are you going to do this week to take care of yourself, especially now. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah.
And I think I lost. And partnering with the SRC to host a Rainbow Day and make Instagram posts in support of LGBTQ I2S events, etc. We hadn't heard about social media, and I'm not sure what schools around the country are doing. It's probably, you know, a combination of active and absolutely not active. But that's a space where your students are, right? And showing your visibility where they are, that's super, super important.
As an aside, we have learned that Instagram is my students have been telling me that Facebook is for old people, is what they've been saying to me. So Instagram is, I'm like, what? Like, this is like, goodness. I'm like posting things on Facebook and they're like, okay, we don't use this anymore. So I didn't know, and I was like, oh dear. So they've been using a lot of, we really upped our Twitter and Instagram posts, and we're getting lots. So for those of you who are kind of trying to pick your medium, I got sat down and informed a couple of months ago that Facebook is no longer a thing. Like, my 15-year-old niece doesn't even have it. She's like, no, we don't use that anymore. So if you're picking, I don't know if that's just like an international truth, but yeah, I got a talking to from my students about, like, we don't check our Facebook when you post things there.
Oh my goodness, that's embarrassing for me.
Right?
Like, I don't even have an Instagram account. I'm not even there yet.
I know. Well, I'm not like all that knowledgeable about the tweeting. I have somebody else who is, but I'm like, I'm officially old, I think.
Right. Just hire somebody to do that for you. Like, say this somewhere where they'll find it. Awesome. Exactly. Great. Thanks.
Exactly. Okay. Anything else you want to wrap? Anything in particularly you want to?
You know, there's been so many. I would just encourage everybody to take a quick glance. I noticed that Karen also shared a resource. GSA students got to participate in co-writing this amazing youth written document with other youth around Canada 2 years ago with the Centre for Global Education. Awesome. There's just so many ideas.
Okay.
So let's just, you know, take 10 seconds and scroll through them.
Okay.
Jot down what you can.
Okay, so thanks so much for all of that information sharing. It's really helpful for all of us. Maybe we haven't thought about things. I think my favorite one from our last webinar is they actually had students doing, they were pen pals within the same school board, but they were doing it through classes. So that was one of the ways that they were connecting some of their youth, which I thought was really cool. But we are going to keep moving along, and we're going to talk about generating buy-in and handling pushback from our communities and our administration. So we've talked about this a little bit, but underscoring the urgency of supports for LGBTQI2S students, particularly currently in this climate. So we have talked about this before. I'm not going to go back over and talk about it again, but really recognizing that this is a moment in time where our queer youth and many of our queer folks are really struggling, and that these resources that were available before may become one of the few that are still accessible. So making sure that these are still priorities are really important. It might be helpful for you to think about finding common ground and link to existing priorities and policies. So if you want to think about, if your school has, I know our school at the University of Windsor, and it might be a bit different if you are coming from a public school space, but we had a huge emphasis the last 2 years on mental health in general. So we had a big movement, like we did a climate survey. We have invested, probably millions of dollars in our students' mental health. I think what we want to start thinking about strategically as Affirming communities is thinking about the linking the queer issues to ones that are already existing and have been really validated. So when we're thinking about, for example, the mental health one, we know that queer youth are struggling with mental health more than non-queer identified youth. So getting resources and access to funding or attention or prioritizing makes a lot of sense based on an already pre-existing initiative. So if you can make those links back and forth, it might make your life a little bit easier. We also want to think about making the argument that creating affirming spaces for LGBTQ2IS students and faculty and families is a good thing for everybody. So we are going to have, I wish we had so much more time whenever we get into these workshops, but I cannot stress to you enough the need for inclusion of intersectional analysis in this work. So I will say to you that I have a little person that goes to school who is she's mixed race, so she's quite visibly othered. She also is neurodiverse. She has something called ventricular megaly, which has caused some, like her hands do the same thing at the same time. So using scissors in her classroom is real challenging. And I think would also be able to make her a target for teasing or othering at another point in time. And she is the lucky kid, the only lucky kid in the school that has 2 moms. So as you can imagine, our apprehension sending her into the school system, especially a small rural school, we only have 276 kids at our school. It's a small one. And they hit hard with the inclusion stuff all around, which is so important for kids like mine who don't just have one identity, right? Like people don't walk through the world with just one piece of an identity. They have all these other pieces. So when we make spaces affirming for queer youth and queer individuals, it makes it safer for everybody, and it sets a tone in your spaces for inclusivity. And that's really important. I can speak firsthand about that. And then finally, when you're getting pushback, it's always really great to come prepared with learning resources and opportunities. I believe my lovely coworkers are going to send you in the chat here a bunch of those. So rather than just coming to your administration and saying, we have to do something to be a more affirming space, and they're busy and stressed out about face masks and budgets, and say, oh, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, or no, it's better if we can come to them with really specific asks or ideas. So can we do this specific, like this tomorrow, I believe, is the Trans Day of Remembrance. So like even having an idea of, you know, I'd like to post this image, I'd like to have it on the morning announcements. Can we start to add this? I think Chet said somebody's already doing that in their schools where they're doing queer focused announcements. So coming with some ideas to the table instead of just kind of a general vague thought can be really helpful. Okay, so we're going to talk just really briefly about GSAs going virtual and advice for support staff, because we're going to let you know that there is an entire webinar recorded on this topic specifically that you will have access to. You can check out and watch yourselves, but just some points are community care is a vital resource for LGBTQI2S youth. So again, coming back to this idea that I think sometimes organizations think that this is just like a nice ticky box to have, you know, checked when we have the time and the resources and the energy. We need to frame this as this is really vital for our youth, and particularly right now when things are feeling stressful for us and are probably feeling in a compound way stressful for our youth. As I mentioned before, we want to assess and respond to privacy, safety, access needs, and wants. So those kind of like needs assessments that Jacqueline sent out earlier, this is really important because we want to be thinking about if they are not living at home with affirming families or within affirming communities, we need to be thinking about how we are naming our GSAs, what kind of topics we're talking about, even like what pronouns and names we're using to address the folks in our GSAs. So making sure that that's a safe space for our students to be able to attend. We really, I've already kind of talked about this, but deepening the club's intersectional lens, this is so important. So if you're already doing affirming work for queer communities, it is essential that you deepen your understanding around intersectionality, because as I said before, we don't just leave our house in the morning and put on our queer identity and choose to leave our you know, our financial situation or our race at home. We can't do that. We have to walk around the world with all of that on. So making sure that, and that can pose really individual challenges for queer folks. So painting all queer folks with the same brush and saying that we're doing that work is a start, but it's not going to serve the individuals in our communities well. So that would be my encouragement to continue deepening your learning around that if you haven't already. Let digital formats spark creative possibilities. We talked about that a little bit. There's some really interesting things going on with digital. I know so one of the things that I've done with my class is I have a 2.0 program that students love to come and be part of a community. They're often, if they're struggling, they're feeling quite ostracized. So I started a 2.0 program for graduates of my original program. It meant that they came and we did like yoga together. We did potlucks. It was just really like a community building space. And when COVID hit, I thought, well, I'm not teaching lectures in these spaces so I can put a lecture online, but how can I create community online? I was really lucky to have access to resources at the university, but what I ended up doing was I bought those flat rate shipping boxes, and I created little Ziploc bags of weekly activities for 6 weeks and labeled them as such, and then I mailed them to my students and we all hop on Zoom together to do the activity together. So last night they were doing face masks and creating their own affirmation cards, and I put little like snacks and stuff in the bags for them. We also had a Netflix party, so that week they got chocolate and popcorn in their little baggies, so like we could all be sitting around watching the same show, and it's really created a shared community experience outside of what we would have normally been able to do. And then help youth bridge the gap online, no matter where your GSA is at. So some of you are struggling to keep your GSAs going, some of you are thriving, some of you are somewhere in between, but making sure that we are still creating some space, some presence online if to help create those bridges for our youth during this time. Oh my goodness, Chet, are we almost on time? Kind of, maybe a little bit. Okay, a little bit. So this is the spotlight that we did a few weeks ago. That's really weird to see me in the corner and then see me in the corner up there again. It's a little bizarre. But this webinar was called GSA Tools for Tough Times. So strategies to help your gender sexuality lines meet the moment. And it is, sorry about that. This is available online. You can go check it out. All of the kind of quick discussions we've been having about how to move your GSAs online successfully are really fleshed out in this webinar. So I would encourage you to check that out, and that will also be dropped in the chat for you. Okay, so I think what's really important when we're talking about creating safer and affirming digital environments is that you have to know which youth may be disproportionately impacted and why. So I believe the stat was that 52% of students aged 11 to 22 had experienced specific homophobic bullying online. So this is a real thing. This is happening out there. And knowing, like just knowing that our queer youth are more at risk is kind of half the battle to start. We also want to recognize features of queerphobic online bullying that intensify harm. So some of those things are things like they can be anonymous. So people who would not say those things in your classrooms or your hallways might say them online. They can also give the feel that there are tons of people making those kinds of statements or accusations when it could in fact be more like just a handful, but it can feel supremely overwhelming for a student in that space. It also can feel quite a lot like they can't ever escape from it. So when it's an online presence, they can't go home and get away from it, especially if it's in their online classrooms or social spaces that they are currently accessing. If you are managing these digital environments, we want to ensure prevention and intervention that takes an anti-oppression approach. So like I had said before, I'm a big fan of those kind of like ground rules that you come up with together. Ideally, if you can't come up with them together, making sure that those statements are made from the very beginning, that you're not going to you're not going to accept any racist, homophobic, classist, like, you know, like making those really firm statements from the beginning that those are not going to be accepted. One of my favorite bakeries in Kingsville actually says you have to wear a mask and you can't be homophobic, transphobic, or racist in order to come in. They have the rainbow sign out front of their little cupcake shop in Kingsville that I really love, and it just really sets the tone for when you enter that space feeling safe. You also want to be proactive as well as responsive. So maybe having these discussions about what does queerphobic bullying look like online so that folks know that you know. So you might want to even kind of have those kinds of discussions ahead of time. And you also obviously want to be able to be responsive. So having a plan about how you're going to handle any instances of bullying before they happen is a great idea. As you know, like we all have that moment where somebody walks by and says something, rude to us, and then 20 minutes later we have this great response, and we're like, I wish I had had that at the ready. So we want to be ready to be responsive and have a plan. And we want to emphasize the empowering potential of digital communication tools. So this doesn't have to be all bad. As I said tonight, that we have so many of you from across the country that we normally would not be able to see all at the same time, and you're able to share things where maybe you'll never meet in person, but you are able to share resources and experiences and thoughts here in this digital space. It also might mean that, as I said before, folks who couldn't normally access our space, our physical space or supportive space, can access a digital one. So we want to be thinking also about how this could be a really innovative way for us to be doing the work. This is another spotlight that we're gonna give you. I have actually not personally taught this resource, but I got a chance to look it over in great detail the last couple of days, and it is excellent if you are going to be in a space where you are worried about cyberbullying, or how to handle it, how to identify it, how to name it. There are just really detailed, practical pieces of information in this resource for educators that we are also going to drop into the chat there for you. I learned actually quite a lot when I was going through it. I was really impressed by the clear breakdown of, sometimes I think what happens online is it can feel a bit slippery, in my opinion anyways, when we're seeing that kind of bullying happening. And the really clear way that it was delineated, named, talked about, how do we handle it, really clear resource if you'd like to check that out. So that's another one that we will leave you with tonight as well. Oh my goodness, it is 8:32, Jen, and we have arrived at the Community of Practice Knowledge Exchange. I think that might be a record. I'm happy about it. Are you?
I'm quite impressed.
It's like I need a drink of water, perhaps. Like I've been running, but
Yeah.
I hope it didn't feel like that for you folks. It's always a challenge to make sure we get both time for a knowledge exchange and also enough information headed your way so that it feels valuable for you to have spent time with us. But at this point, we're going to ask for, you to ask for or offer help on a question or challenge related to promoting LGBTQ I2S affirming environments or supports in your school or communities. So if you have a great idea that has been helpful in creating an affirming environment in your school, please drop that in the chat. And if you have a challenge that you're hoping somebody can help you with, you can also drop that in the chat. And I will, and I think Chet will be kind of sharing some of those with us as they come in. So these can be big ones, these can be small ones. We welcome any and all kind of offers and questions.
Excuse me, and yes, thank you, absolutely, Katie. I also just want to remind people that you can comment both privately and publicly. If you're not comfortable asking your question kind of openly, you can send it to us privately. If you wanted to tell us about anything in particular that maybe doesn't fit within 160 characters, you can also raise your hand and I'll unmute your mic so that you can speak verbally.
I'll give folks a couple of moments there.
We had some really great chat earlier. One thing actually that keeps coming up, I'll admit I'm not there yet, is Discord. That seems to be where kids are at today.
Oh,
where I'm 6
I don't
technologies
even know
behind.
what that is. Um, I haven't. I don't even know what that is either. But I have heard that too. That is one that is being highly utilized. I think that's actually a really important discussion to have when we're thinking about affirming environments. Is again like taking that needs assessment scan of where are our folks gathering, what are the platforms that they're using, because if we are, you know, throwing ourselves against the wall of creating Facebook groups that are not really accessible or popular, is that a good use of our resources?
Yeah. It also leaves blind spots. If that's where, if they're in Discord and Discord
Yeah,
isn't a safe space and we're not there, we have no way of helping.
yeah, I agree. We I keep seeing a bunch of flashes, but like I said, I'm not actively monitoring. So if folks don't have, um, I'm wondering if they're going to come in a few minutes as people think about them. Chet?
Yeah, yeah, it might just be a matter of people articulating their thoughts.
Yeah,
One thing that did come up, Jordan works with ETFO and shared a fantastic resource. I checked it out a couple of moments ago. Brilliant website that has a lot of resources. So I'd highly
great.
encourage you to check that out, or everyone to check that out. And I believe Jack is going to be compiling all the links that have been shared. There's been a few that the group has shared. So we'll be compiling
Wonderful.
those and sharing those kind of in one condensed list for everybody after the session as well, so you don't lose them.
Good, good. Okay, we are, I believe, going to leave a few minutes at the end to for folks to be able to scroll the chat if you have things that you come up with around if there's a particularly big challenge that your school or community is facing that you're hoping this community could help you out with, or if you're like, we landed on this nugget of information or activity, make sure that you do share that in the chat, and we'll leave it up, I think, for a few minutes after the webinar
Yeah,
is over.
yeah,
But do we want to keep
yeah.
moving?
We do have a couple of questions actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So Mayuan has asked. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize that that was private. Apologies, Mayuan. Asked if we have any suggestions for schools that are using out of date resources or older resources that may be using out of date language.
That's a bit of a, do other folks, so that's a great question, I think, to ask the community that's here tonight if they've had that issue. I know for us, when we have been using outdated textbooks at the university level, sometimes it's a money, like a resource issue. And if we're not able to get our hands on more relatable texts, or if we are not able to afford to get new ones, I've actually seen some of our professors use those outdated pieces of language as teachable moments. So like having their students take their resources out and even go so far as to cross out the outdated or really gendered or non-inclusive language and write in the textbook being more inclusive language, as kind of the act itself can be helpful if that's the issue. So I have seen that response to some outdated resources.
Great, thanks. There is actually, somebody's asked about any resources related to transition planning for students who might be transitioning during the school year. And if we have any templates or exemplars. I know that we do have one, sort of one available. It's more for adults, but there's probably some information that could be transferable. Do you, Katie, know of anything that would be useful for kind of a school age audience?
I think I would need to think about that, but I will send that along. Not off the top of my head, actually. I think for school agers, nothing that is really concise. It's a really good question, though. So if anybody else has that, I would love to hear the answer.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I just noticed that TDSB might have one. And of course, every transition is unique.
Yeah.
But any support is usually welcomed.
I just wanted to insert that I've put it in the chat, supporting your gender diverse child, which is a GAL resource as well.
Great.
Thanks, Jack. Did we answer everything? I think we've answered everything that's been submitted, so we're good to go.
Okay. So folks, we still have about, I think, around 5 minutes left. So if you have things that really you want to kind of throw in there or have answered, we won't disappear on you in 2 minutes. But we are going to move on to the evaluations for tonight's webinar. So these are kind of a new format for us, and it's really helpful for us. If you don't mind, I think they're dropping, Jack, or Chet is dropping a link into the chat. Is that, or is it at the end they get it?
Yeah, I believe soon as they try to log off, it'll automatically open up. So don't walk away from your computers. Please fill out the form.
Please fill out the forms. It's really helpful for us to know what is working in this format, what's not, what you liked, what you didn't, because this, like I said, is a little bit newer for us. So your feedback is really important. We do read everything and we do take it into account when we are creating content. So if you wouldn't mind taking the few minutes to fill that out at the end, that would be great. And then we just wanted to thank you so much and applaud your resiliency and your dedication to this work. I know that being particularly in education or just a human in the world right now, things seem to be changing really quickly and taking up a lot of our own resources. So thank you for spending an hour plus with us on a Thursday night when I'm sure you have a billion other things happening. When people like yourself show up for queer youth, it just really makes a huge difference. And we also want to acknowledge that you're just probably going all having all cylinders firing just to kind of do the basic things you have to do. So it's a big deal that you came tonight. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you again for the other trainings. We have some more coming up that we are working on. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can always contact us at the email there on the screen, training@egal.ca. So thank you so much for your time tonight, for your participation. Chet said the chat there was quite lively, so that's always great. And do you want to add anything before we wrap up, Chad?
No, this has been an absolutely brilliant session. Lots of peer learning, lots and lots of stuff happening in chat. As I mentioned earlier, we will go back through, kind of sift through and grab all the great bits and compile them for everybody tomorrow morning. There are 1 or 2 questions that were submitted privately. We will do our best to research answers to those and get back to you. You know who you are. And that's all I have to say.
Okay. Well, I think that's it. Hopefully, you folks, we wrap things up, I think actually 1 minute ahead of schedule, if I am correct. So that is a personal record in EGAL time for me. So hopefully we get you all back to your evening things you need to be doing with respect to your time. And hopefully we see you again. Thanks so much, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.